After Jesus was baptized, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Growing up, as I did on the East Coast, I always thought of wilderness as a vast tract of forested land, something our colonial forebears would have found when they first landed here. Countless acres of trees rolling out into the distance. The house I grew up in was surrounded on two sides by just such a forest, the East Coast version, with its deciduous hardwood trees of oak and maple. Any cleared land was just that, land that had been cleared for farming or pasturage. To be lost in the wilderness was to be surrounded by trees with no way of knowing which way was which, and with no view beyond the immediate circle of trees. Even living out here, one too readily imagines a forested wilderness full of vegetation and flowing streams. The trees here even larger, with their evergreen canopies making the forest appear even more impenetrable and overwhelming. And yet for many of us, a place of recreation, refreshment, and renewal. But this is not the wilderness of the Bible. The biblical wilderness is the desert, a barren and dry land where there is no water, as the psalmist says in Psalm 63, an uninhabited wasteland where nothing grows. It is vast and open, empty and lifeless, dry, hot, and dusty. There is no shelter, and there is nowhere to hide. It is the wilderness of Moses and the wandering Israelites. It is a place of challenge, struggle, and testing. And it is into this wilderness that the Spirit leads Jesus in our gospel reading from Luke. The same Spirit who just before this at Jesus' baptism appears as a dove, descending upon him in bodily form. On him as the voice from heaven declares, "You are my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And it is in the wilderness that Jesus is tempted by the devil. After 40 days and nights of fasting, the temptations come. Jesus is enticed to satisfy his own hunger by turning stones into bread, to be assured of his own physical safety, and finally to gain dominion over the kingdoms of the earth by turning away from his own true mission. Through it all, he rebuts the tempter with quotes from the scriptures and shows himself and us that he truly is the beloved Son in whom the Father is well pleased. One way of looking at this is that Jesus is going out into the wilderness to prepare himself for his ministry. He leaves all that has been familiar and opens himself up to temptations from within and without that might undermine the path before him. Throughout his ministry, Jesus periodically goes apart to spend time alone and to pray. He withdraws from all the apostles and the crowds, their demands and expectations of him, opening himself up to God to be reminded of who he is and the true path before him. In the same way, in later centuries, Christians withdrew from society into the desert. These desert mothers and fathers were seeking a path to God, away from the distractions and temptations of a comfortable life at a time when the early persecutions of Christians were ending. They wanted to draw nearer to God, to immerse themselves in God's presence, away from all those enticing external distractions, to pray unhindered by the demands of the world. What they found in that fierce landscape of the desert is that in just such a place there is nowhere to hide from the distractions and temptations from within, that they carried their own demons within themselves, such as the voices telling them it was all just a waste of time, that they were more or perhaps less, of value than they thought. Voices seeking to distract them from their focus beyond themselves. Anyone who has ever spent any time in meditation can only too easily identify with their experience. How readily those inner distracting voices come. The ones suggesting there's nothing really out there, that it's all a waste of time, or that lead us to focus on all we could be doing, or need to do, or should have done, and so we start making lists, and we end up listening to ourselves and not able to hear any word God might speak to us. When we allow the silence to penetrate further, we face the demons of the parts of ourselves we spend our unfocused hours too readily ignoring. Our attachments to materialism, security, prestige, all those temptations that faced Jesus in the wilderness, our own interior places. Even Robert Frost, that poet of the New England landscape, recognized in his snow-covered surroundings a mirror of his own inner desert in his poem, Desert Places. It goes like this. Snow falling and night falling fast, oh, fast in a field I look into going past, and the ground almost covered smooth in snow, but a few weeds and stubble showing last. The woods have it, it is theirs. All animals are smothered in their lairs. I am too absent-spirited to count. The loneliness includes me unawares. And lonely as it is, that loneliness will be more lonely ere it will be less. A blanker whiteness of benighted snow with no expression, nothing to express. They cannot scare me with their empty spaces between stars, on stars where no human race is. I have it in me so much nearer home to scare myself with my own desert places. We are or can be so fearful of letting go of all those distractions and temptations and finding only our tawdry selves that we are unable to recognize that we too are beloved children of God. That the more we open ourselves to the other, the Holy One, the more we will find ourselves, our truest selves. And as for those desert forebears, and as they knew it, it is not for the faint of heart. To pray is a courageous act. To be vulnerable and open to our own reality, the mundane and the divine spark, the ugly and the beautiful. It is why even they would seek out each other for counsel and reassurance, as well as a challenge to go deeper. It is why we come together to pray as a community, to hear the words that remind us of who we really are and whose we really are, to receive the bread and wine as food for the journey through our own wildernesses into which we find ourselves led. And so as we travel together through this Lenten desert season, I invite you to explore those inner desert places in your own prayer life, to journey together to an Easter celebration of new life, for the desert is also a place of healing, a place to rid ourselves of the masks we wear, the personas we don thinking to protect our vulnerability and hide our failings. As the writer Marietta Anschutz puts it, Lenten penitence engages the dark places in our lives that we may come face to face with them, name them, understand them, and seek forgiveness for them. It is not about guilt. It is about freedom from the control that our fears and insecurities have over us, about the amendment of life and new beginnings.